Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Denver Museum of Nature and Science at Home. This is our webinar series on COVID-19. I'm really excited for today's presentation. We're going to be talking about misinformation and misunderstanding as it relates to the coronavirus. I'm Kristen Uhlenbrock. I work at the Institute for Science and Policy, a project here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. We're really excited to be partnering with our friends at the Colorado School of Public Health to be bringing you this series. If you've missed any of our previous 7 recordings, you can find written recaps as well as those videos on the Institute website. Just go to institute.dmns.org. We're excited to welcome 2 audiences to be joining us this morning. We have our friends here on Zoom quickly chiming in on the chat about where you're tuning in from, so welcome to Zoom. Getting familiar with that chat feature, which is where we're going to ask you to answer and ask questions along the way. If you're tuning in on Facebook Live, welcome from that channel as well. Feel free to type in your questions along the way in the comment feature. We will be monitoring those and trying to work those into the conversation as well. We have 2 presentations today. We'll try to take all of the questions after both presenters are done speaking. So today's topic is something we frequently discuss here at the Institute and kind of is relevant to all of our lives, which is really understanding how does misinformation and misunderstanding spread, particularly in the media landscape. With the rise of the coronavirus, we've seen a lot of misinformation out there as well as a lot of myths. And so we're trying to address that today to figure out what takes hold in the public discourse and what can we do to think critically about how to assess information about what we're seeing and what we're reading. So joining me today are 2 experts who think very deeply about this topic. And will be joining me is Dr. Steve Goodman and Dr. Elizabeth Skewes. Dr. Goodman is an Associate Dean and Professor of Epidemiology and Medicine at Stanford. He is co-founder and co-director of a group called Metrics, which is dedicated to improving the reproducibility and efficiency of biomedical research. His interests include how to evaluate research evidence, the ethics of research, scientific communication, and how to teach research skills. Dr. Goodman has led a distinguished career, receiving numerous awards, such as a Lifetime Fellow from the American College of Epidemiology and the Spinoza Chair of Medicine from the University of Amsterdam. He studied biochemistry and applied math at Harvard, has a medical degree from NYU, trained in pediatrics from Washington University in St. Louis, and received advanced degrees in biostatistics and epidemiology from Johns Hopkins School of Medical Health. We're excited to have Dr. Goodman with us today. And we also have Dr. Skewes. She is an Associate Professor of Journalism and Media Studies, including serving as the Chair of the Journalism Department and the Interim Chair of the Advertising, Public Relations, and Media Design Program at the University of Colorado Boulder here in our own backyard. Her research focuses on media sociology and news practices, the media's role in electoral politics, and politics and popular culture. She also researches media coverage as it relates to mass tragedies and the victims of those events. Dr. Skewes is a former reporter and is the author of the book Message Control: How News is Made on the Presidential Campaign Trail. She holds an undergraduate degree in political science from UCLA, a master's degree in journalism from Ohio State, and a doctorate in mass communication from Syracuse. So we are in great hands today. With that, let me welcome and introduce our first speaker, Dr. Steven Goodman. Good morning, Dr. Goodman. How are you?
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me this morning. So I'll just move over to my screen share. Everybody should see my screen and we will start. So thanks for having me, and I look forward to not only the conversation with everybody who's on right now, but learning from my fellow panelist, Dr. Skewes. Anyway, we're talking about myths, misinformation, and misunderstanding. Usually I teach about facts, real information, and proper understanding. So this is a little bit of a change of pace, but this is just the flip side. So we're going to go through it pretty quickly because we want to get to your questions. And here are some myths that maybe you've heard about. Vitamin D protects against COVID. Almost everybody on ventilators die. If you don't have symptoms, you can't have COVID and you can't spread it. You can't survive in the warm weather. Hydrochloroquine can cure or prevent death. Children either can't get it or can't get sick from it, and Advil makes it worse. So we're going to talk about this. We have to talk about the fundamentals of what is good science. Now, everybody knows that science is about getting to the truth. That's easy. It's what's in the books. It's facts. but that's really not the active part of science. The active part of science is to get the uncertainty right, what we don't know right, how sure we are. That is really hard. And it underlies all of scientific research. And a primary crime is not just getting the facts wrong, but getting how sure you are wrong. It's the difference between saying hydrochloroquine might work and hydrochloroquine is a game changer and you should take it today. And we have 66 million pills in a stockpile somewhere because of the second statement. So uncertainty underlies all scientific research, and it's happening in real time, right in front of our eyes right now with COVID. And this is making it very, very difficult to sort out what's true and what we can rely on. Now, this thing we call uncertainty has two pieces. One is it's the play of chance. It's what we call the margin of error in a political poll. You always hear them say, you know, one candidate is up or down 5% plus or minus 3%. That's the play of chance. But there's something else, which is the reliability of the methods themselves. And it's hard to put that in a formula. So if we were measuring national presidential preference, would we go to a Trump rally or a Biden fundraiser to do it? No. You have to know where that poll was done, or would we base it on a random sample? Now, you sometimes need a lot of expertise to know whether the methods are good or bad. And here is one of those polls. This is 538 just from yesterday. And you will see on the side, on the right side, you can see my cursor, you have the actual numbers, Biden and Trump. But on the left side, you have their grades for how good are the methods of these polls. And we're not going to go into the science of that today, but notice this is not a number. It's just a grade. It has to do with saying, is this a reliable poll or an unreliable poll? And it goes to the methods. Well, let's see. So these are some facts about COVID publication. In the first 6 months, that is right till today, over 10,000 COVID scientific articles have appeared. Over 5,000 of these are in the form of preprints. And during the SARS epidemic, before the pandemic ended, there were 29 papers published. So we are in, they call it's a tsunami, not just of information, but also of misinformation. Now, what are these things called preprints? Well, this is a preprint archive. You can look it up. It's pronounced medRxiv, a preprint server. And what you will see is this is the preprint server just for COVID-19 preprints. There are, as of today, and remember, it didn't exist before January or December, 5,500 articles already in this server. And maybe the most important thing is what's in this yellow box. It says, medRxiv is receiving many new papers on coronavirus. A reminder, these are preliminary reports that have not been peer-reviewed. They should not be regarded as conclusive, guide clinical practice, health-related behavior, or be reported in the news media as established information. Well, we're going to look at a case study of whether that's true. So 5,500 articles already. What are these? So this is actually one that got a lot of attention. It was from some of my colleagues here at Stanford, a seroprevalence study that is trying to figure out how many people in Santa Clara County had antibodies to the disease. It got a huge amount of play because it claimed that the infection rate and therefore was higher than we expected, and therefore the death rate was way, way lower. And it was part of an argument that that COVID is no worse than the flu. So just within a couple days, this started being questioned. And I should back up just for a second. A preprint is a paper that a scientist puts on the internet just straight from their computer, There's no reviews, no comments, no nothing. It just goes straight onto the internet. There can be comments after they put it on, but not before. So there's no assurance that any scientist has ever laid eyes on that paper before. So this was actually just a week later, and I won't go through the torrent of articles. This was challenged in terms of its methodology and the reliability of its claims. But this is the analysis I want to show you, which was how quickly this went around the internet. And what we have here is, I have to just get our own pictures out of the way. Oops, I'm sorry. This study was posted on April 16th on a Thursday afternoon. Friday a.m., it started, the tweeting started, and the size of these circles are the number of followers that these various people had. And these were all contributors to Fox News and actually sort of the conspiracy blogo and Twitter sphere. And this is a series of tweets and retweets of this paper. And I'm not going to read all the names, but it's basically through this sort of hyper-connected information sphere that we know as Twitter. And here, we're just going to scroll down. So you see this is April 17th at noon. And now we have it 3 p.m. We're going down. 6 p.m. It's still live. And this is just one day. So it was retweeted on the way over 100,000 times just within 24 hours after it was put on the internet. This was also an example of how these things happen. These are various highly followed pundits and Coulter, Alex Berenson, Brendan Ike. And what we have here is just a few interpretations that are tweeted to many, many people. This is in contrast to this model, which is more academic, which is many people tweeting many different interpretations to many fewer people. In an ideal world, it would happen more like this if we want to get the true heterogeneity of the scientific community represented among the critics. So what was the scientific crime, or what were they accused of? In fact, they weren't necessarily that wrong, but it was felt that the scientists overstated or hyped their conclusions, underplaying or misstating uncertainties in their methods. They might be right, but in science, if you say you have too much confidence in something, when the methods don't justify that, that's seen as bad as getting the facts wrong. This is another paper that appeared in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. This actually was published and was peer-reviewed, but I'll say more about that. This just happened about 3 days ago. One of my postdocs saw this, was incensed. Now, what's interesting about this is it had a conclusion that we all agreed with, which is that masks are a very important part of protection. But it dramatically downplayed every other maneuver that we're doing. And it was felt that they tremendously overemphasized and overplayed the role of masks. So I won't go into all the methods, but egregiously so. So he wanted to write a letter and coordinate a letter saying this should actually be retracted. And you might have heard a few other retractions recently of major pieces. Now, when I first looked at this, I hadn't appreciated the last, author is a Nobel Prize winner. So anyway, he coordinated this letter. He sent it out just a few days ago. This is the letter saying to the Proceedings to the National Academy of Sciences, to the journal, saying it really should be retracted. And this is a person being quoted on a website called Retraction Watch, saying even though he agreed with the conclusions, that is, mask wearing is very important, thought the paper was terrible, and that's why he signed on. Well, this got tremendous play, and just a few days ago, this appeared on BuzzFeed, and then the same day, on Thursday, this appeared in the New York Times, that this should be retracted, not because of the bottom line claim. This is why I say it's not about the facts, but it's about how sure you can be on the basis of the methods. And you'll have to take my word for it, the methods of this were not that great. And the Nobel Prize that the scientists won was in atmospheric chemistry, was in chemistry. It was not in health and not in epidemiology. You might have heard about this. NIH halts trials of hydrochloroquine. This is just a few days ago, actually just 2 days ago. The important thing here is it was not based on a paper, but just a statement from the trial. This is the other problem. This you probably heard about, a low-cost dexamethasone reduced the fatality rate among those on ventilators. The problem with this, it's not necessarily untrue, is that this is a press release. So we don't even have a paper here. It's just a press release. It's very hard to know what to do with it. Although actually I trust this result because I happen to know a lot about this trial and the investigators. And then you get claims like this in the Lancet and about hydrochloroquine. It actually preceded the other one just by a few days. And this was retracted. You probably heard about a scandal about this paper. Probably all of the data was made up. And honestly, actually, this went through peer review and everybody's trying to figure out what happened. A very famous epidemiologist just 22 years ago said, on the internet, can we just throw everything out there and have everybody just vet it and we can get rid of journals? And he said, no, what will happen is we'll have such a tsunami of junk that some enterprising young people will get together and they'll start sifting through it and they'll have a website somewhere and they'll say, this is the reliable information. And in fact, that's exactly what's happened. At Johns Hopkins, they have this new thing just a few weeks ago that they put together where 70 that were a bunch of faculty members, about over 70, comb through the preprints and they put their own reviews of the preprints on the web. And he said that this would just recreate the journal system, and that's exactly what it's doing. So this is an article in a Hopkins publication about this and about the problems of high-speed science. This is an article that appeared in Science by two ethicists saying we cannot lower our standards just because of the urgency of the pandemic. And this is very true because every time we do, it's another myth that we have to stamp out. So what are the questions you can ask? And this is my last slide. And we'll talk more about this in the discussion section. Is there a publication at all when you read a claim versus a press release? Have other scientists even seen the paper? Have they commented? Is there enough detail for effective comment? Has it been changed in response to the comments? Are you just looking at draft number 1? Is it published in a reputable peer-reviewed journal? I will tell you, you have to ask that, but as we've seen from the retractions, it's not always 100% guarantee, but you have to ask. Are the numbers large? Are the methods strong? Are the limitations out there? And did the conclusions come with caveats, with warnings? And that's where I'm going to stop. So I'm going to pass the baton to Dr. Skewes. And thank you very much, and talk to you in a few minutes.
Thanks, Dr. Goodman, very much. Welcome, and thank you, Dr. Skewes. We're ready for you to kind of kick us off before our Q&A.
Great, thanks. It's wonderful to be here. I appreciate everybody showing up. Some of what I say will probably mirror some of what Dr. Goodman said, so, but I will try not to be too repetitive, and I need to do this. So I'm going to talk to you about COVID and myths more from a media perspective, since that's my area of expertise. And I wanted to start, as Dr. Goodman did, with just grounding us in what are basically good practices in journalism. These come from a team of writers, Bill Kovach, Tom Rosenstiel, who, pardon me, were journalists for a long time. And they came out with a book called The Elements of Journalism. And the things that they really wanted to emphasize is that journalism has an obligation to truth, and that duty is more important than any duty that journalism has to publishers or to corporate structures. In fact, it has an obligation to publish the truth the best as it can, given deadlines, and it has a loyalty to citizens, and it requires a discipline of verification. All of those are critical, and they're at the top for a reason. All of that gets challenged, though, in a produce journalism fast, a social media world. And, you know, just as speed is antithetical to good science, it's also antithetical to good journalism. So one of the things that we also need to talk about is how polarized we are when it comes to understandings of the media. Trust in media, this comes from Gallup research by political party, shows that Democrats place more trust in the media than independents or than Republicans. And you see that that gap has widened. So in 2019, the most recent year for which the data is available, you have more than a 50% gap between Democrats and Republicans in terms of their trust in the media. This also shows up in our understanding of how people interpret COVID information. People who lean left tend to trust the media a whole lot more about information on COVID than people who lean right. People who lean right tend to trust the government a whole lot more for COVID information.
Dr. Skewes?
Yes.
Do you want to share your slides so we can see? I think you've got slides to accompany some of this.
I thought I was showing slides. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It was lovely to hear you just talk. I think we want to see some slides too.
Screen.
There we go.
Okay.
Perfect.
Sorry. So this is role of journalism. This is the graph that I was showing you. Apologies to everybody. Again, and you can see the difference in Republican and Democratic trust of media, with independents falling somewhere in the middle. So where we are right now is what a lot of people in the media and some health experts call an infodemic. In addition to having a pandemic, we have this overabundance of information. And the fact that there is an overabundance of information means that it's much harder for the public to tell what's real and what's not. A recent Pew study said that 2/3 of Americans have said that they're seeing news that seems that a lot of it is just made up. And part of the problem is that we've seen newsrooms, because of market considerations and budget constraints, have to trim and trim and trim their staffs. That means there are fewer science reporters, people who have a real background in health reporting. And that means that the journalists who are covering the pandemic, a lot of them are people who are just general assignment kind of reporters. They don't have a lot of expertise. And so they fall back on traditional journalism practices, trying to give balance to all sides of a story, and not all sides when it comes to science are necessarily equivalent. So there's less critical judgment about what might be real and what might not be real. But this overabundance of information is causing real problems. It's also a problem that information about the pandemic has become politicized, that it has become an issue where there's not real consensus. Some people in politics will say one thing, some people in politics will say another thing. And because of that, when there is contested information coming from experts, coming from people at a podium, coming from people who are government experts, it leads to a lot of confusion. And that means people rely on what they do know, which is they're either trust in government or trust in the media. And so we see things where people now, again, according to Governor Doug Burgum in North Dakota, some people are being mask shamed. If you wear a mask, it's a political statement. If you don't wear a mask, it's a political statement. It's no longer a public health statement. And that's a problem. Social media puts all of this on steroids. Social media is where most of the misinformation about COVID-19 has been spread, and it continues to be spread there. 25% of the most viewed videos on YouTube, 25% of them had significant misinformation or misleading information about COVID-19. Studies of social media show that information that is false, which is more usually dramatic, it's usually more sensational, so it spreads farther, it spreads faster, it spreads deeper, because we have these, oh my God, I can't believe it moments, right? And so we post, we repost, we retweet, we put it on our Facebook pages. The novelty of it makes people more likely to share it. And the other thing about that is, when we see information on social media, it comes from our friends. Even if we've never met these people, our Facebook friends are our friends. Our guard is down, and we tend to believe the information more than if it comes from a media source. So if you look at this particular chart, you can see that social media, if you look at the total chart, about 68% of the public believes that social media websites and apps do contain misinformation, but again, they can't often tell what's true and what's not. 54% say misinformation is coming out of the Trump administration, 45% say misinformation is coming out of mainstream news. What we're seeing on social media is information that says initially virus was a hoax. In Great Britain, a lot of stories about the virus being caused by being too close to 5G cell towers. That resulted in cell towers actually being pulled down, and a lot of unverified treatments. All of this kind of gets coalesced, if you will, in this video. So on May 4th, a 26-minute video went online. It was called Plandemic, and it actually is a trailer for a full-length film that is supposed to be coming out sometime this summer. Hasn't been released yet, but one of the lead people in this video is Judy Mikovits, and she's a well-known figure in the anti-vax movement. And she's made quite a few claims that have been discredited by science about COVID-19. And in this video, a lot of them get repeated. Again, the hydroxychloroquine, the fact that it is effective against coronaviruses when there's no scientific evidence to support that. The fact that the virus was actually created and created so that billionaires could profit off of a vaccine that people would then flock to take. She purportedly said that if you get a flu vaccine, your chances of getting then coronavirus are increased by 36%. Again, no scientific evidence of that. And she said that wearing a face mask actually increases your chances of getting ill, of getting coronavirus. Again, no science to support that. But it was posted, and much like some of the stories that Dr. Goodman showed, this one posted on May 4th. It went from being posted to QAnon, which has a Facebook group, posting it on their page. From there, it got shared out by another 1,600 people, including an anti-vaccination doctor who had appeared on Oprah, so had some celebrity. So if you, again, think about those bubbles in Dr. Goodman's presentation, more likelihood to spread. An MMA fighter, also more likely to spread because of some celebrity there. And you can see in this one graphic how over just in a matter of days, the Plandemic video just started getting shared more and more and more. A total of nearly 2.5 million interactions on social media, compared to a lot of other types of stories. It was shared by a Republican politician. It started circulating in mostly conservative media circles, viewed 8 million times, the 26-minute trailer, before it was finally removed by Facebook and YouTube for violating their policies on misinformation. So how do you know what's false? Well, there's a lot of places, especially with COVID-19, that are trying to give us accurate information and tell us what is real and what is not. So you've got all of these sites, World Health Organization, Federal Emergency Management Agency, the CDC, Department of Defense, Rumor Control Center on coronavirus, and even organizations like PolitiFact, which normally deals with political claims, but because coronavirus has become a political issue as well, PolitiFact has a section on coronavirus where you can get ratings. And if you scroll down a page, you get more detail on why that rating is given. So drinking a bleach solution will not ward off the virus, and that gets its highest false rating because drinking bleach or a bleach solution is, again, very antithetical to good health. And what can you do to stop the spread of false information? First of all, is fact checking the information that you see on social media. And if you see something that's incorrect, correct it, even if it's from one of your friends. The problem is that when we share false information, it adds to the noise of the whole tsunami of information about COVID-19, and it gets retweeted and reshared. So checking the information, making sure that before you repost or retweet something, that you verify it, and provide links when you do that, so people who see your post or your retweet can know where you fact checked that. And again, you can go to some of those websites I just posted. Avoid repeating. This is a hard one. So if you see false information and you're trying to correct it in the best way, in trying to inform the public, you're trying to debunk it, when you repeat that information, you actually amplify it. So try to avoid repeating it. Just put out accurate information. It's something that's a little hard to do. It's something that news organizations had to learn, that repeating the error only makes people kind of believe it for some reason, even if it's in a correction. It's about familiarity and hearing it repeatedly. So these are some things that you can do just from your end of the world to try and tamp down the amount of misinformation that's out there. And so that's what I have, and I'm looking forward to a discussion about this.
Great. Thank you very much, Dr. Skewes, for that, and for Dr. Goodman. We have a ton of questions coming in, so let's try to sort through and dig through some of these and carry on this conversation. Maybe let's start with a little bit of what we both were talking about. So I'd like both of you to maybe talk about, you know, Dr. Goodman, you called it a tsunami, right? There's this noise, there's all this information coming out, there's all this research coming out, happening at lightning speed, because it's a very novel, new, you know, pandemic and virus, and people are very concerned. It's impacting everyone's day-to-day life. So there's this push-pull between people needing and wanting information, and the rate of science, particularly peer-reviewed science, is coming out, and the ever-changing guidance, particularly guidance that is maybe based on some science, but then science evolves and the guidance changes, right? And so it's a little bit of some of that trust, and creates a little bit of uncertainty in people who are not deep into the knowledge of any particular field and just trying to get information. So I'm wondering if you both could unpack that just a little bit. What, in essence, should be that right balance between information that people need to know and want to know, and the sharing of open information, and what people would consider their right to know, as well as with understanding the scientific uncertainty and how long that process takes before we're often very certain about something. Dr. Goodman, do you want to start?
You actually asked a lot of huge questions. I'm actually going to not do justice to the answer to that. I'll simply say that all parts of the information system are under pressure. One thing I didn't make a point of vis-a-vis journals is they're in a race against the preprints. They are competing against the preprints right now. So the journals themselves, which have literally hundreds of papers to vet, feel like they have to do that vetting process very, very fast, because that paper is often already on a preprint server and already being reported on. So it's putting pressure on the journal's peer review process, and this is why we've seen some retractions from very reputable journals, is speeding up as well. So all parts of the ecosystem, of the information ecosystem, are suffering under the strain of this and trying to strike that balance. The journals are really, really trying hard to do the vetting for the public in a way that the public can trust the claims, and that comes with the caveats, the claims and the caveats. And I think it's hard for any individual to know exactly what to do in the face of this. But as I said, I do think that information that comes from information that has been vetted by other scientists, and this is also even true for preprints, not just taking a lot of the reporters are looking straight to the preprint servers. They used to look only to the journals, but now they're looking at the information as it comes off the computer of the scientist. And that's a big, big problem. So there's going to be problems with any system. I would say that the people who are trying the most to do the curation for you are, as Dr. Skewes said, science journalists, good science journalists, and in a sense, the journalists, remember they're science journals, so they are like journalists, the journalists at the science journals who are doing this intensive vetting with the help of other scientists. And we have to start to ignore a little bit more the claims that are coming from other sources where multiple people and people with expertise haven't had a chance to weigh in. And again, it's too big a question. That's as much as I'll say right now.
No, that's great. Dr. Skewes?
I would just add in again that one of the things that people need to think about as they're assessing the quality of information is how fast it came out. If it's a tweet that somebody just pumped out in about 30 seconds and 240 characters or less, that may be less accurate or reliable or valid than information that took a month or two to really dig up and and vet. And it's that vetting process. The less time you have to vet information and make sure it's accurate, the fewer eyes that you have on it before it gets published, that's where you want to be a little more skeptical. Whether that's journals and preprints or journalism and social media journalism or, things that are being reported 15 minutes after they happen. I think we all have to be a little more media savvy about the quality of the information sources that we're going to.
I would just add one thing, which is that it feels like we can't find out things fast enough because of the urgency of this epidemic. But the fact is, just like all things in life, if you're taking a long trip, you go down a detour, you waste a lot of time.
Yeah.
So it really does pay to wait a little bit of time for that information to be confirmed and to be reliable. We don't make anybody better by reacting within, as Dr. Skewes says, within seconds, minutes, or even a few days. Sometimes it might take a week, but that's a week worth taking because 90% of the information falls away while the 10% that we can rely on comes through.
That's a great point, Dr. Goodman. Dr. Skewes, maybe can you follow up on that too and expand a little bit more? You mentioned and talked about, of course, the decreasing scientific expertise in the newsroom. So what is the responsibility of the media to cover preprints or not? I mean, that seems to be it's this ever-increasing information coming out there that scientists haven't vetted yet, but the media is picking up on these preprints. Could you talk a little bit about what you think their role should be?
I do think that journalists need to be better educated about the role of preprints versus published vetted information. For years, again, health journalists have reported on published information out of scientific journals, and they've waited, but there hasn't been the big rush. I think the urgency of this moment has journalists searching anywhere for information, and journalists aren't always the best at asking the questions about how did the science get produced, the methodologies, the things, how certain are we that this is real, the things that Dr. Goodman was talking about. They need to be asking those questions as well as they start to report this information. They need to understand that preprints are essentially the scientific equivalent of Twitter.
So our audience is a very hands-on active audience. So what are some things, two parts here, and both of you can tackle this. What are some factors that influence the spread and circulation sometimes of misinformation or, myths or rumors? And then what can people do in their own day-to-day lives to help combat some of that? I know, Dr. Skewes, you had a little bit of slide on that, but I'm wondering if you both could comment on both those things. How things are being spread, right? Is it the newsworthy, the sensational, and then what can individuals do a little bit more? Let's just reiterate some of the things we've highlighted a little bit more here at the end.
Well, and I'd say sensational, I'm going to jump in first. I'd say sensational, but it's also, again, you think about this moment where people are desperate for good information. And since there is disagreement coming out of the
Oh, Dr. Skewes?
I think we lost her.
Are you with us?
Information is.
There we go.
I'm sorry.
You cut out briefly. Maybe if you could start right over from the top again. Thank you.
If we're looking at the quality of information that we're getting and the disagreement, the lack of consensus coming out of the political administration, coming out of our range of media organizations from left to center to right, the lack of consensus means that the public, which really wants good, accurate information, gets too much information from too many perspectives and is highly confused. So I think that, again, we need to go to media sources that we trust, but the media journalists who are covering this need to step up and do their jobs a little bit better and ask those questions about how is this science produced? Because they do have that public duty to inform, especially in a pandemic.
Dr. Goodman, what is the role of scientists here? They're doing research, but what is it beyond their research that they could be doing to help ensure that people are taking their information as best as possible?
Honestly, I think we have to be very careful about the use of preprints. Preprints had a very valuable purpose, which is as communications among scientists. But now, because of this epidemic, we're looking, the public and the media are looking at them as scientific sources. So the scientists themselves need to think carefully about whether they should be preprinting their information in a preprint server, and what the balance is of the possibility that it might be misinterpreted and spread very fast without vetting versus the benefit of speed. And I will say that many scientists may or may not be the best judge of that, because they're trying to get noticed for their work as well. So I would slow down the flood of information going to preprint servers, allow the information to be vetted. It is no longer just a communication among scientists who can judge it. It's going, as I said, straight to the headlines, straight to Twitter. And so scientists can play a role in, first of all, being sources for the media, because as Dr. Skewes says, many reporters are covering carjackings in the morning and COVID news in the afternoon, because there aren't dedicated science reporters in as many newsrooms. So there's simply not as many science journalists who can do this. So scientists themselves have to help play this role. And for those who are generating the research, I actually think, unless it's of the highest methodology and of absolutely critical, urgent public health need, that they should not be using the preprint servers as an alternative dissemination source and go through the traditional routes, which, by the way, are moving with lightning speed. There are many journals that are publishing papers within a week. So after it's been seen, after they called in a lot of favors and twisted a lot of arms to get the papers reviewed. So sending it through the journal process is no longer the months-long wait it once was. We're getting speed out of the journals that we once thought we could only get out of preprint servers. So serving as a source for the media, and not sending their own work out too fast, and also setting up services like I showed you from Johns Hopkins, where they themselves spend time vetting the most prominent things that are out there that maybe haven't been vetted by others.
We're getting close on our time, but I would love for each one of you to take this and position yourselves of a friend or a family member came to you and presented to you with a piece of false information or something that seemed like an obvious falsehood. How would you respond? Like, how would you individually, whether that's on social media or in person, how would you respond to that person? Dr. Skewes, would you start for us?
Yeah, I think the first place to start is with really compassion and understanding, and trying to find out why that person thinks that information is accurate. And I've actually done that with a couple of people, less around COVID than around other issues. But when they say something that doesn't seem to be supported by the information that I know, one of my first questions is, oh, where did you hear that? Tell me a little bit more about it. What was the evidence that was presented in the story? Could you send me a link, right? I want to know where you got your information. And then, then it's a conversation to say, because that's not my understanding. I'm not going to tell them they're wrong, but I'm going to say, that's not what I understand. And here's where I got my information. And let's talk about kind of information quality and whose information might be more accurate. I think it is important to recognize that people have their trusted sources of information. And if I go in and simply try to say you're wrong and where you go for information is stupid, that doesn't open up a conversation, and that doesn't help correct misinformation.
Dr. Goodman, how would you respond to someone?
My answer is almost exactly like Dr. Skewes. I would say, there's the parable, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. What she described is teaching a person how to fish. That's saying, where do you, why do I rely on a different source than you? And where can you go for different information? It's unlikely you will literally convince them just on the basis of your authority that something is right or wrong, but that doesn't solve the problem. You have to help them understand where you look and where they should look for reliable information in the future, because this is just one of many discussions you might be having with them if they don't understand how to do that. So I think pointing people to the sources of what we would consider more trustworthy information and explaining, just as she said, why we might not rely on that, because most people want those criteria that we use. They might want to know, why does the sample, why does it matter that it was really big study, or why does it matter that it was randomized, or these sort of words and technical things that people hear but they don't know how to interpret. So teaching people, meeting them where they are, teaching them what we use, I think that's the best we can do, and I don't know what else to do.
Thank you. I think those were very lovely words to end on from both of you. It's very foundational to what we do at the museum and the Institute, which is definitely having empathy and listening and having those conversations and dialogues across all different spectrums, right? Because everyone thinks that they know and they have that information that they can bring to the table. And so you have to have conversations to really start to earn that trust. And trust takes time to earn, and it can quickly and easily be lost. So it's something to be protected. I am very thankful for both of you for joining me today. This went by so fast, faster than 45 minutes I've ever seen. I think we could talk all day about it. But very much thank you for your time. I know you're joining us a little bit earlier, Dr. Goodman, from the West Coast, and Liz, you're in our own backyard. So thank you both. For those of you who stayed in all the entire length of the time, thank you for joining us today. We will be doing a written recap, and we're going to include all those great links that you've seen in the presentations today about where to go, either whether that's the myth-busting link from the World Health Organization or some of those other great resources that our speakers presented. So we will get that information back out to you. Just go to the institute.dmns.org website to read all of the past written recordings, and you'll find one about today, and we'll try to send that out in an email as well too. Make sure you're following us on our social media channels. We'll drop those handles into the chat when we leave here. And we look forward to tuning in with us next week, where we're going to talk a little bit about the ethics around COVID-19. So another exciting presentation that kind of builds a little bit on today, because I think ethics is really embedded into kind of information as well, to an information sharing. Have a wonderful rest of your Monday and rest of your week. Thank you for joining in today.